All good to go. So if at any point during this you have a question, just drop it in the chat. I'll be monitoring that. If I don't get to it, there just may be things coming in as I'm talking. Feel free to loop back at the end, and we'll have a longer Q&A. You can raise your hand. We'll get to go from there. So a little bit about myself. My name is Machmud M. I currently go to Stanford Law School, where I'm a 2L, which means I'm in my second year. I took 6 years off between college and law school. I went to Oberlin College for my undergrad, played baseball there out in Ohio, so I know we have some Midwesterners here. I knew coming in just how I grew up. I referenced before I'm an immigrant, and I knew I wanted to go in public service in one way or another. So had the chance, was very lucky to do that straight out of college. Worked on a couple different political campaigns, did some speech writing. Ultimately, I had the chance to work for now President Biden on his campaign. And then that was able to translate to a job at the White House. And so I got to serve not just the country, but the entire world. In the second half of my time there, I was working on the COVID response team. We were sending out vaccines to different countries across the world. So no matter where you're from, we probably helped out. And then after that, I came over here to Stanford. One other thing I missed right after college, I was super lucky. I won the Rhodes Scholarship, and I got to go to Oxford and stay for 2 years. So it was a very formative part of my life, and happy to talk about that as well if anyone's interested. So you guys are all here because you want to go to law school, and it seems like a really complicated process. I remember when I went through it. My brother is actually applying right now, so I'm kind of helping him through it. But I want to kind of break things down to make it simple, because fundamentally this is a very simple process. Some of the component parts can seem hard, but if you break things down and follow a timeline, which I'll talk about a little later, this can be a very manageable process, and you can kind of build out a path for yourself individually to ultimately go to law school you want and pursue your dreams. So first fundamental question is, when you're thinking about applying, is what schools do you want to apply to, and ultimately where do you want to go? And so I think about it in three fundamental ways with all the different clients that I work with. Number one, what do you want to do? It's kind of an obvious thing, but you'd be surprised how many people show up to law school and they have no idea what they want to do. So I recommend having some sense of that. Number two, where do the people who do that thing go to school? And then number three, where do you want to be? So I'll talk a little about all these parts in particular. So the what do you want to do question is really important, because there's a ton of different things that you can do with a legal degree. Excuse me. A lot of people work at big corporate firms. As someone, like I mentioned, I'm the first person in my family to become an attorney. I'm an immigrant. The financial aspect of becoming an attorney, particularly in the private sector, is not a small thing. And so I know a lot of you guys may be thinking about that as a means of building wealth for your family, and I 100% encourage that. So you can do corporate law. If you're more inclined to do public service, like I was, you can think about doing things in the federal government, but also state and local governments. There are a variety of nonprofits that work on all the issues that you guys care about. But which school you go to can really affect your chances of landing in those different places. And so before you start applying, but especially when you are applying and thinking about the essay process, your recommendations, your resume, so on and so forth, if you're thinking about a job that you want to take before law school potentially, really think about this question of what it is that you want to do. You, of course, don't have to be married to that. Ideally, like, you come to law school and you learn a lot. Maybe sometimes you change your mind. That's definitely something that's proven true in my case. But the reason I really recommend honing in on this question, which seems really simple, but actually kind of complicated, of what you want to do, is because not only does it give you a better narrative for pitching yourself when you're applying to law school, but once you're actually there, you have a better sense of how you want to use your time. There's 40 different things that you could be doing every single day. And so for you to have a sense of, okay, I'm trying to get from point A to point B, can really help you figure out what it is that you want to do activities wise. What classes do you want to take? What kinds of summer jobs do you want to take? What kind of internships do you potentially want to do while you're at school? So I would start off with there. Secondly, once you've kind of figured out what it is that you want to do in a general sense, let's say you want to be a federal clerk, let's look at all the people that do that kind of thing, both immediately after law school and in a longer term sense. Where do they go to school? I hate to say it, but law school and law generally is a very nepotistic kind of field. That's probably true for a lot of different fields. And so who you know really does matter. I've seen that a lot. I think especially someone, like I said, whose family didn't have any attorneys, and I was very surprised that I show up here at Stanford and a lot of my classmates, their parents are lawyers, and they're lawyers at big companies that some other people are interested in working in. And People get jobs literally based on the fact that they know somebody. So that networking effect, it doesn't have to be familial. It really comes from your classmates and the alumni, but it's big. Which brings me to the third point of where do you want to be? So I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I was going to say, if you want to stay in Georgia, it can really make sense to apply to UGA or Emory or Georgia State. Of course, everyone wants to go for kind of the fancy top schools, T14, some people call them. Those definitely give you a lot of flexibility in terms of where you can go geographically, and I'll talk about that a little later. But at the same time, if you're really wed to staying in, let's say, New York or Chicago or LA, it can be really helpful to look at the employers that you're interested in and see where do the people who work there as lawyers go to law school. Just going back to that networking effect that I was talking about before. If you really want to do, let's say, entertainment law in LA, maybe UCLA is not the number one ranked school in the country, but it is definitely the number one school for doing entertainment in LA. And so that might be something that you think about as you're kind of planning your strategy for where to apply. So as you're kind of building out your list, I generally recommend that you apply to more schools than you think you may need to, both because obviously these cycles are somewhat unpredictable, but number two, you want to give yourselves options for negotiating and leverage after the fact. So what I mean by that is, you might get into X school, it's your dream school, but they're not giving you a lot of money on the financial aid front after the fact. You also got into Y school, which is a similarly ranked school, and Y school is giving you $50,000 per year. You can go back to your first school and say, hey, this school, which is really similar, is giving me a lot of money. I really want to go to your school, but obviously like money is money, and so I have to follow that. Would you be willing to match this number? And oftentimes, if it's a similarly ranked school, they will do that for you because they let you in, they want you to come. So that's why I generally recommend applying for a broader range of schools. Now, to break down a bit some of the component parts of the application. So like I said before, I think when you're applying to law school, a lot of people get freaked out because it seems like this big, complicated process that's hard to navigate. But fundamentally, it's really just 6 pieces, and I have all 6 of them listed here. Some of them are going to be baked in by the time you graduate college. So maybe some of you guys are working already, some of you are already in college, but that's your GPA. So like you can't change that obviously after the fact. LSAT is something that you have a little more control over. Your personal statement, that's really the foundation of that first question that I talked about in the previous slide. Why is it that you want to go? And so I'll talk about this a little more specifically later, but you basically really want to paint a story of who you are, what you've done, what your life has taught you, and how you've maybe taken risks or have shown leadership, and why is it that going to law school makes sense for you. Third is your resume. If you go to Leland, which is sponsoring this talk, there's a lot of different resume templates online there that you can check out. If you've never put together a professional resume before, that's something that both in terms of how you structure it stylistically is really important. No typos, no mistakes, but the substance of it is important. And so thinking about how do I showcase, maybe I was involved in a club and I led a change, or maybe I wrote a paper and it got published. How do you frame that in such a way that is attractive to law schools? So that all goes into the thinking about the resume. The fourth is your letters of recommendation. So all schools will ask you for at least 2 letters. Some of them will allow for up to 4. You want to have at least 2, and you want them to complement one another. So obviously there's just some things that are kind of awkward for you to talk about yourself. You can't call yourself like the smartest student that you've ever had at Berkeley or whatever it is, but a professor you've had may be able to say that, or a supervisor that you've had. So thinking strategically about what is it that you want those letters to say that other people are not, or that you yourself are not able to say, and then how do they play off of one another? And so you might have one letter of recommendation from an employer that really saw you, let's say, write a good memo on an issue that you care about that plays into why you want to go to law school. And then otherwise, there might be someone that you have as a professor who talked you through a variety of different classes and saw you kind of grow throughout the class and contribute to the conversation and help kind of lead and shape that. You want to make sure that you have a mixture of people who can complement one another in order to showcase all your different strengths. Number 5 is a supplemental essay. So this is not true for every school. Some schools will not allow them, but most of them do. Some of them take the form of a diversity statement. And so you'll talk about what it is about your upbringing or your personal background that gives you a unique perspective that you can contribute to the class. Other essays, like at Stanford, for example, there's a supplemental essay that's optional where you can talk about 5 songs that mean something important to you, or 5 books that you would recommend to put in the Stanford Law Library that might teach something to your classmates. So these are what I think of as more like personality essays. And so if you have something that's like a defining story in your life that you really think makes sense for your personal statement, but there are other aspects of your life that are really important that you're not necessarily highlighting there, the supplemental essay is a good place to put those in. And then the 6th is the actual application form. A lot of people put this off until the very end because it's basically just putting in, your name, your address, financial aid information, all the different places you've worked. But depending on the school, some of them can be quite cumbersome. So the most important thing to keep in mind here, obviously no typos, keep everything clean and tight, but you also want to make sure that you have enough time to actually fill it out. Some of them basically ask you to replicate your resume. And so you have to put in not just where you worked and where, but during what time, and then what your job responsibilities were during that job. So the form is super important as well. I think we had a couple questions here. Would these also be addendums? Yes. So the addendum is in some cases the same thing. Other ones it's kind of different, but basically what an addendum is a space where the law school will allow you to add any additional information. So with a lot of the clients I work with, let's say they have like a super good LSAT, but their GPA is not really at the same level. But the reason for that is because they went through a personal challenge. Maybe there's a health issue or something serious that went on that caused their GPA to drop. Or in some cases, I have some people who wanted to go to med school first. And so they took a lot of hard science classes and that dropped their GPA. But then towards the end, they switched their course of study and their grades improved. The addendum is a place where you can address that and basically say, my LSAT's very strong. I know my grades were lower early on in college, but they improved over time. And I think that my grades more recently reflect my academic strength. And that's why I'm bringing it to your law school potentially. I got another direct message. That's a question. I'm an NCAA Division I athlete. Would my coach be an acceptable letter of recommendation for law school? So I think that's one that it really depends, which maybe not the most satisfactory answer, but I think if your coach is someone who can talk about your teamwork, who can talk about how you've pushed through various challenges and how you've grown as an individual, that can be super helpful. But fundamentally, what these recommendations are supposed to do are make the case for why you would be a good law student. And so what is it that they're looking for in terms of you potentially contributing to a class? That means you showing good reading comprehension skills, analytical skills, reasoning skills, basically all the things that the LSAT teaches. And so maybe if a coach can speak to those things, that's great. But you want to make sure that the constellation of letters that you pull together make that case explicitly. This is not like business school, for example, which is much more about leadership. Law school is really about, or at least the application process is about, how can you contribute as an attorney and how can you contribute in class? So just to dive in a little bit in terms of the LSAT and GPA, I show this graph not to scare anyone, but basically to make the point that for 80% of people, your LSAT and your GPA are going to be the most important things that determine whether or not you get into a law school. And so here I pulled up just the top 14 schools per the most recent US News and Report rankings. So you can get a sense of what the numbers look like and whether or not you're competitive. A lot of you guys might find yourself in a place where, let's say your GPA is in range, but your LSAT is not. Those are the points, or vice versa. Those are the points where all the other factors become much more important. And so I've seen people really overperform the numbers if they have a really compelling story, if they have a unique background, if they have some kind of challenge that they've overcome. And I think the important thing to keep in mind is, like, a lot of people get freaked out. They think, oh, I needed to start some nonprofit, or I needed to solve cancer, or I need to serve hungry children. Those are all great things to do, but at the end of the day, there is something about you that is special and different than everyone else on this call and in the world, right? Nobody else in the world has had your life except you. And so what I try to help people think through when we're working on the personal statement is, how do we lift up your unique life experiences and make that compelling in a law school context? So obviously that differs for everyone because you all have different lives. But I show this to say that even if you are not in range of numbers, I don't want to let that dissuade you from not applying to the schools you want to go to. Obviously, we need to be realistic. And let's say you're scoring, 153 on the LSAT, then maybe you want to look at a set of schools that's not this SAT that we have in front of us right now. But if you are someone that's even just a couple points below, still apply, go for it. Just make sure that you're tightening up every other aspect of your application. And so I also just wanted to mention, I have this link. I pulled this data from 7Sage, which is kind of a law school admissions website. So if you have any question as to kind of where you rank up in terms of the schools that you're looking up, you can type in your numbers there and it'll give you a relative sense of where you stack up for the most recent admitted class. So a good resource I feel around useful when I was applying. So I want to talk a bit about the personal statement. I saw we had a question that come in. So would a mock trial coach be a good recommender? That's a good question. So that is definitely potentially good because mock trial is like an activity where you're showcasing a lot of the same strengths and skills that you'd be utilizing in law school. So if your coach can speak to, how you reason through arguments well, how you've worked with a team, that's actually one of the activities that I think is most akin to the experience that you would have in law school. So definitely a good place, but I would make sure to pair that with a more academic letter just to make sure you're getting that balance that I talked about earlier. So just to go in on the personal statement, LSAT, GPA, your two numbers, like I've said, like that's the most important thing for kind of establishing your floor. But after that, the personal statement is really the meat of the application. And so when I start to work with clients about thinking through how to write it, I really take them through the 3-step process. So the first question that you want to ask yourself is, who are you? Which is kind of a big question. But what I mean by that is, what is it that you went through your life that made you the person that you are today? Whether it's how you grew up, whether it's what you went through in high school, whether it's how you changed in college, you have a worldview, you have things you're interested in. You wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is think about something or you feel excited about something. How did that happen? We all have things that we can tie to early on in our life that bring us to who we are today. And so exploring that, I found something that's really good for me, at least, is kind of walking around outside and calling old friends and just kind of catching up about stories and experiences I had that were seminal to me. It really helps kind of situate myself and like, why is it that I care about what I care about? And then understanding that the person who's reading your application knows nothing about you. So you really want to be overly explicit in explaining who are you and how did you get to that point. The second point we want to walk people through is, how did you explore life? How did you take risks and how did you fail? How did you learn? How did you maybe change your mind about something that was foundationally important to you when you were growing up and now you have a different perspective? And so often what that looks like is activities in college, whether it's something you studied or an organization that you're a part of, or if you were working, or if you worked afterwards. What is it that you took from college and your life before that you applied to the work setting that now maybe changed your mind about something or made you even more committed to the idea of going to law school in the first place? What that basically does is take the base that we've established is who you are and then show that you are a dynamic thinker. You're not just kind of letting life happen to you. You've taken control of it and you're reacting to it in some way, whether in the form of a job or an organization that you play a big role in, or even just kind of interpersonal matters, whether you've led a team, maybe not at work, but you did something in your community that led to a change. And that leads directly to the third point. Why does law school make sense? So now that we've established who you are, how you've changed, maybe something you've learned or something you've led, I want to be able to read your essay and come away with it at the end saying, okay, it really makes sense for Brian or for Cameron to go to law school next. Sometimes people do that in the form of, and therefore I want to go to law school because XYZ. Generally, I find those essays are not as powerful. You really want the meaning to be somewhat implicit. And so if you're talking about, let's say, justice in a situation in which you encountered injustice and you did something about it, or if you didn't do anything about it, honestly, and it make you feel bad and you were kind of sitting with what the lessons from that were, I can still take away a sense of why it is that you want to go to law school from that. And so this is also a space where towards the end, you can cater your essay towards the particular school you're applying for. I think if you're applying early decision or if you just have like a real favorite, no matter what the circumstance is, it's always good to show that you've done research into the law school and why their particular programmatic offerings fit in with what you want to do. And so let's say you're really interested in AI and kind of ethical questions around AI, and Stanford's a school that you're looking at. We have a huge AI center here that has like different programs, different classes. And so mentioning something like that can really tie together the thread of okay, I know who you are. I know why you're interested in AI, and I know why you want to go to Stanford, because we have these programs that you've researched and you're excited about that you want to take advantage of. So that's how we think about the personal statement. The next thing I want to talk a bit about is our recommendations. So, as I mentioned, you need two minimums, sometimes up to four. But the real thing about this is you want someone who really knows you. I know some people sometimes come up to me and they say, "Hey, I know a U.S. senator." Someone actually once said, "I know Joe Biden," and it's like, well, can maybe Joe Biden can sign a letter for you, but he's probably not going to write one that indicates that he actually knows you well. And so sometimes it's a professor, sometimes it's a little league coach, sometimes it's a mock trial coach, someone that's worked with you closely that can really tell those personal stories. Because at the end of the day, most of these letters look kind of similar. They say XYZ person is really smart. They took my class or they worked for me. They did a good job. They did XYZ projects. That's great, but that's kind of baseline. What we're really looking for is a story that this person could tell about something that you either learned or you overcame, or something that they're proud of you for, something that a situation where you made an impact on someone else's life. Those anecdotes are super, super powerful. And just by nature of relationships, those will come better from people who know you versus people that don't. And so I would not get too fixated on titles. They've seen all the schools that you guys are applying to, they've seen fancy people write in before, but it's a paragraph and it's basically, yeah, I acknowledge this person exists and I know them in some way. That is not going to help you at all. It is much better to have someone who has seen you grow and can tell those personal stories. And then I talked about this a bit before, but it dovetails some of the questions that came in. Be strategic about setting up complementary narratives. And so what that means is basically you want to make sure that you're telling a full story throughout your application. And as we've established, this is not a very long application. It's actually pretty simple. Now that we've broken it down to this 6 parts. So you guys are all complicated people with incredible lives and you've done a lot of different things. But it'd be hard to fit that into a 2-page personal statement or just a 1-page resume. And so to the extent that you can have your recommenders play off of one another to establish different parts of you, super important. And so generally there will be some schools that say explicitly, we only want academic recommendations. Others will say we want at least one. A situation where you really want to lean in on a professional recommendation versus an academic one is in the case where you took a lot of time after school to work. Like in my case, I was out for 6 years. And so, number one, I had a letter that was saved from college, but for me to reach out and ask other people, 6 years had gone by and a lot's happened. And so, some of my work supervisors were in a better position to talk about just kind of who I am, what the values are, how they'd seen me operate in a work setting. And so that's a situation where someone who's coming from work can be particularly useful. Okay, we had a couple of questions come in here. I'll just answer. Is it required to get a recommendation letter from a college professor? So as I said, some of them will explicitly say we need an academic letter. In that case, if you've gone to grad school already, it can be a grad school professor, but otherwise, yes, that does mean a college professor. In all of your cases, no matter what, even if you're, 6 years out like I was, I would get at least one college recommender, just because they can speak most specifically to the academic side of things, and that's something that's important for law school recommendations in particular. I got another question. I have some letters already, and they're really good. They're a couple years old. Would those be fine? Yes. So I think if some letters are preset, also something that some of you may not know, once you sign up for your LSAC account, which is kind of the form that you're going to be sending out all of your applications through, you can accept recommendations starting that day. So if you're someone who's in college right now, but knows that you're going to take a couple years off to work, it can be helpful while a person knows you well and is fresh and is willing to write the letter for you to just put that letter away, ask them for it, get it in, and then save it. And then it'll be in your account literally forever. And then you can come back in a couple years and get your other letters and then go ahead and apply. So if you have some letters that are already there, and you feel, well, you probably haven't read them, or at least you shouldn't have. If you feel good about it and you have nothing to update, then go ahead and use that. But presumably, some things have changed in your life. And so if you are willing and able to reach out to those people and say, hey, I really appreciate the letter that you wrote for me. I've also done XYZ since we've talked or since I graduated, whatever it may be. If you wouldn't mind incorporating that into the letter, make it as easy as possible for them. And I'll just say for a second, when you're doing your outreach to these people, some of them might be current professors, so people you literally see every single day, and so they know what's going on with your life. Oftentimes, particularly if you're someone who's been working for a little bit, they may need, you're all special, but they may not remember you that well, or at least what they did with you. And so it can be helpful to send in the email where you ask them just a couple bullets of, hey, just as a reminder, I took XYZ class with you, or I did this project with you since I graduated, or since I took a class, I've done, these three things, and now I'm applying to law school because I want to do XYZ. Laying that all out for them and helping them as much as possible can feel awkward, but I promise you they will appreciate it so much because they get a lot of these letter requests. And to the extent that you can do their work for them, that is a huge advantage. Another question, I work for a member of Congress and they accept me as one of my recommenders, except they want me to write it. How do you recommend I write it? So this is a tricky situation because there will be some schools that technically say you shouldn't write your letters. I'm not going to tell you guys to break any rules, but I've been in this situation, and depending on who your boss is, they may just literally not have the time to do it. They will edit it. But if you are writing your own letter, my advice generally is to not hold back on being as effusive as you can. And so talk your stuff, hype yourself up, be honest, like don't lie and say you did something that you didn't do. But to the extent that you're going to describe everything you've done and who you are as a person, make it easy for them and kind of write everything that you would want them to write. And then send it over to them, they'll edit it and they'll submit it to the extent that they feel comfortable. I have another question, which I think is probably applicable to a lot of you guys because you went to college during COVID. So how about those of us who are not able to create relationships with professors due to COVID? And so they don't really have a personal relationship. So I know a lot of you guys are probably going through that. That's a situation where the aspect of making it as easy for them as possible is super important. And so maybe you didn't get a chance to talk to them, but now you can really be clear about, hey, I took your class, I got this grade, which is pretty good. Presumably that's true because there's a reason you're asking them. And just really lay out to them, why is it that you're applying to law school? What is it that you learned from their class or from them? So basically write the letter in the email that you're doing for them and then just see if they're comfortable with it and they can kind of go from there. Something else you can do if you have some time is basically reach out to some professors and say, hey, I really enjoyed taking your class. Is there any way I could do research for you on the side while I'm working, or if you're still in school, I'm in class. Reestablish that relationship and build it. And oftentimes I've seen that be very successful for applicants. If I haven't taken my LSATs, it's still okay for me to ask those recommendations down as well. Yes, you can definitely do that. If we graduate in the last 3 or 4 years, but we can get better recommendations from our coworkers, would you recommend submitting more professional letters? Yes. So in a situation where you can only submit 2, what I would do in that case is do 1 academic and then 1 professional. If you can do up to 4 and you get 1 strong academic letter, but then just the basis of your relationships, people have been working better, submit those extra ones, 1 to 3 professional recommendations. The thing I would say about going over 2, it doesn't help you to have 2 strong letters and then a mediocre letter. So in that case, I would just say, don't do it. If you have 2 strong letters and you can get 1 or 2 more strong letters and you feel confident about that because of your relationship with the writer, that's the situation where I would put in.
Like I should do it every 2 weeks.
You could come as often as every 2, but sometimes there's also a
Sorry, I think someone's mic's on. I can't tell who it is. I think you're having an argument with your roommate about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Sorry about that. I hope it gets resolved with the roommate or whoever it is. How soon do you recommend start asking for letters of rec? As soon as you feel confident. I mean, if you are on the verge of graduating and you feel like you have a good relationship with someone and you can explain to them why you want to go to law school, go ahead and get it out of the way now. It doesn't take that much time. And like I said, once you have it on file, it'll last forever. And we get the chance to circle back. Can you advise us on the role or implications of attaining T14? Yes, I will go to that towards the end, but I just want to make sure. Let me get through this deck real quick. So I want to talk a bit about timeline, and then we'll go to Q&A, and I'll come back to that question. So don't freak out when you see this, but I do want to establish that it is important. Let me just close this chat box. It is important in basically every single case to try to apply as quickly as possible. I say that for two reasons. Number one, let's say Stanford, for example, there's about 180 people they accept. If you're applying in, I think they accept applications through end of January, maybe it's middle of February, but if you're applying towards the end and they've already accepted 60 people, well, there's 60 less seats. So I know there's a bunch of lawyers, but you can do math. It is harder for you to get in once more people have gotten accepted. So you want to ideally have everything in place to submit, if not on the first day, as close to the first day as possible. That is not something that everyone will tell you, but it's something that I've seen both in my personal case, but also working with clients that can make a real difference. The second important part of that is if you apply early, you're probably going to hear back earlier. And so in my case, I thought I was going to go to a different school. It was my dream school. I got into that school, but then I also got into Stanford, and then I learned more about it. And because I had so much time to kind of visit schools, talk to people, I actually changed my mind as to where I wanted to go. And that can be the case for a lot of people, just because you learn a lot about a school by looking at the website, you watch YouTube videos, whatever it may be. But once you get in, all of these schools do a really good job of connecting you with current students and alumni. And you might find just having those conversations that you vibe with one kind of place more than the other, or there are opportunities that you didn't know about prior that you learn as a result of talking to people. So to help yourself, give yourself as much time as you can to make an actual decision. Maybe you're the kind of person that's like, I want to go to Harvard. That's it. I'm not going to change my mind. And then you get in and then it's still done. In that case, okay, maybe you can take a little more time. But otherwise, I generally recommend applying as soon as possible. With the one caveat that I say all this, keeping in mind that I'm assuming you have everything done well. It is not a good idea to submit like a bad personal statement, sloppy recs, so on and so forth on the first day, just because you rushed yourself through it because I told you to do it early. What I'm saying here is do it early, but make sure you do it well, which is why I'm glad you're on this call and why I did this actually during this time, because now is really the time that you should start pulling everything together if you're going to be applying this fall. So basically what this looks like is right now, start to do some of the strategy piece. Where am I actually going to apply? Who do I need to ask for letters of rec? Maybe I'm taking the LSAT. I know there's an administration in 2 weeks, or maybe you're going to take it in August and you're planning for it. That's where we're pulling all that together. Also giving some thought to the letters of rec. Who am I going to ask? What am I going to ask them to say? That's something when you're doing the strategy, you're writing out the email to the rec, like that might take, I don't know, an hour in total, but then for you to write the email and send it out, that's like 15 minutes. So kind of the answer to the previous questions, you want to do that as quickly as possible, just because it'll give you more time to do everything else. So we're continuing to work on that. And then July and August is really the time that you're giving yourself space to write all the essays. I went through, I don't know, at least 15 drafts of my personal statement. I had a close mentor I was working with from college as my main person, who's kind of my editor. You want to have a group of people who you trust to look at your work and turn it around, whether it's informal, like a friend or a colleague or a former professor, or a coach. You can hire someone like me through Leland or other services to kind of work through that essay process with you. And so if I've worked with people who've kind of done it late and we pulled it all together in 2 weeks, but that's not fun. It's not fun for you. It's not fun for me because I'm responding to your phone calls at like midnight. But if you have to do it that way, you can get it done, but I would give yourself generally at least 2 months to write all the essays. September, October is really where most of these schools start to open. A lot of the bigger state schools in particular open on September 1st. And so they'll actually have the application available prior to then. At some point in the next couple of weeks, all these schools will start opening up their portals. You can't submit at that point, but you can see what the application looks like. And so that'll also give you a better sense of what the form looks like. And so you can look through that and just give yourself the requisite time to get that done. So once you've built your list, I would literally start like clicking through all the websites for all the different law schools you want to apply to and see, what are they asking of me? Is it 2 to 4 recommendations? Is the resume different? A lot of them will say 1 page only, but maybe some of them say 2 pages. And you want to do a 2-page because you've worked for a while, then that's something to know. the personal statements, most of them are 2 pages, but some of them, Berkeley's a big exception. They'll allow 4 to 6. And so if you want to write a longer essay for that, you really want to know all that. So through July and August, we're cleaning that up. September, October, we've done through everything. We've checked all our boxes. We're done. We're go ahead and submit. And then some schools will interview. And so you will be invited to interview in November, December, January. And so I won't talk about that long just because that's not the case for most schools, but and then you get accepted and then you celebrate with your parents and get a cake and whatever you do. So and then at that point, I mean, the point I was driving home earlier, if you get in January, you don't have to commit until May. So now you have 4 months to talk to people, to do more research, to visit these places if you can, and really make the best decision for you. So that's a bit on timeline, and we will go to questions. I saw a bunch pop in the chat, so I'll just go through those real quick. So I want to start with the one that we got earlier about the T14 schools. So the specific question was, can you advise us on the real world implications of attending a T14 versus other schools? So this is something I didn't know, but learned very quickly. And that is that basically there is a real difference, but it depends on what you want to do. If you want to go into big law, which maybe is what a lot of you guys want to do, if you go to a T14 school and you basically don't like flunk out, your chances of getting a job, if you do all the steps and kind of go through the process well, are very high. That is because a lot of these firms, and you can click through their websites, and a lot of them will list the places they recruit. They will only look at, for some firms, like the T14. So I don't want to scare you, though. That is not like true for everywhere. I think for certain firms in New York and DC, LA, San Francisco, that's more true. But let's say you're like me, you're from Atlanta, you want to come back to Atlanta. They love Georgia schools for an obvious reason. They take people from South Carolina, from Vanderbilt, so on and so forth. And that's why on the first slide, I was kind of thinking about what is it that you want to do and then where do you want to end up? It really depends. I will say for T14 schools, there is a real elitism, I think, in certain jobs. And so if you want to be a federal clerk, some of them will only look at certain schools because those are judges making those decisions, and judges can be kind of pretentious, and the legal profession as a whole can be kind of pretentious. And so they'll say, I'm only interested in people from the top 6 schools, and I've been top 14. But I would really give thought to why is it that you want those jobs if they are what you want? And, you know, again, fundamentally, what is it that I want to do? For most legal jobs, you don't need to go to a top 14 school. If you want to be a local prosecutor, then it's probably more important if you go to the local school and develop a network there. But there definitely are some things, and I just want to say specifically, like some big law firms, some federal clerkships, and some of the more prestigious kind of 2-year public interest fellowships, they do look at where you go to school. So just do some research on what it is you want to do, where those people go. And if you notice that, you know, a certain judge only hires clerks from Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and you really want to work for them, well, that should probably tell you something. Okay, we got a lot of questions here. Does the procedure of the school you're taking your undergrad in play a role in consideration as well? In 99% of cases, no. The only case where I've seen it made a difference, for Harvard and Yale in particular, they publish internal data as to how their undergrads fare. And it seems like if you do go to one of those schools as an undergrad and then you apply to their law school, they give you a small bump in GPA. But otherwise, no. I mean, we have people here at Stanford that went to big state schools, that went to a small liberal arts college. People go to military academies. So as long as you have the GPA, you're in contention. And if anything, there is a trend I think I'm seeing now where people want to build diverse classes. And so if you go to a school that's never sent someone to Stanford, but you have the grades and you have interesting experiences, that's a good thing. For a few years post-grad from undergrad, who do you recommend to read and potentially edit our personal statements? Me. I do this professionally through Leland, but you know, if there's someone who you trust, if you don't want to go with like a paid coach, if there's someone in your life who you trust, whether it's a classmate or a friend, you really want 2 things from them. Number one, they have to be a good writer, right? It's kind of the point of the whole thing. But number 2, you want to make sure they know you well. And I think even if you are working with someone who's a coach, they're getting to know you over the course of a few months, and that's not like someone who's known you your entire life. And so if there's an element of your personal story that's super important and you want to make sure you're communicating who you actually are in an authentic way, it can be helpful to have a team of people. In my case, I couldn't really ask my parents because they don't speak English that well. And so that wasn't really a path I was going to go down. But the person who I worked with from my college knew me super well. I worked with him for 4 years. We stayed in touch after. And so he was someone I trusted. So do you trust them to write well? Do you trust them to know you and help you express yourself authentically? I had a question. Why did I apply for law school after Rhodes? That is a little specific, so I'll just say a little about it. I mean, so law school is a professional degree. You are becoming an attorney afterwards. There were work experiences I had after Rhodes where I basically knew for me to further continue in the field I needed to get a legal education. And so with Rhodes, I studied political theory at Oxford. Very interesting. I learned a lot, but there's not really a huge market for political theorists right now. So I needed to get that professional degree as well. For Stanford, where did I get my letters of rec? So I had 3 that I submitted. Two of them were academic from my undergrad, and then one was my current work supervisor. So I balanced it out that way. If I'm auditing a class at a law school, would it be helpful to get a recommendation from that professor? I think with that, it's the same thing as before. Does the professor know you well? And if you've established a relationship, they've seen you speak up in class, they've commented on you doing good work, then 100%, that would be great. But if they don't know you at all and you have an undergrad professor who does know you a lot better, can speak to your specific contributions in class and your academic skill, that would be better. If you take your LSAT a year early before you plan on applying and apply the following cycle, is it okay? Does LSAT keep the scores? Yes. So your LSAT lasts for 5 years. So I actually literally applied in the last possible segment of months where my LSAT was still good. So I'll just say on the LSAT, if you know that you're going to be working after, but you want to go to law school for sure, or even if you're just 50-50, if you can, I would take the LSAT while you're in college, just because you have a lot more free time to build around your schedule versus you start work, you're in the office 9 to 6. It is tougher to study during that. I'm seeing my brother go through that right now. You're tired when you come home, you have to fit in 2 hours of studying. It's just not fun. No offense to anyone that is working right now, studying for the LSAT, you're going to do great. But if you can take it during college, it would be better. You get your score, you sit on it for 5 years, and then you're good to go. What LSAT prep courses do I recommend? I think this really depends on how you learn. So I didn't use a course. What I basically did was I found a bunch of free tests online. I took them, I would review them. And then if there were questions I didn't understand, that link I posted before, 7Sage, they have a whole YouTube channel where they basically explain all the different questions for all the tests that have been released. So all the official tests from LSAC, you take them, and then about 2 years later, they put them out as a practice test. So you can find those for free online. You can also buy them, but 7Sage is a really good source for walking through individual questions. Some people do take group classes, PowerPoint, Blueprint, Princeton Review, and they have good success with that. I've just never been kind of guy that does well with like group learning settings. I prefer to just kind of do it on my own. So I would leave that to you to figure out what's best for you. Is it late to apply in late October for scholarship purposes? No, late October is not too late. And just to drive home the point I was making earlier, you can do later than the timeline I set out. It is just optimal for you to apply on that timeline. But if you need time to pull it together, late October is definitely not too late. A lot of people say undergrad does not matter for law school. Is it really true? It seems like law schools are feeder into their own law schools. So I think the reason you see that is because the people who are ambitious in the particular way to go to law school generally are coming from the pool of people who were ambitious in high school. And so if someone was super smart, they went to Princeton for undergrad, then they probably got that dog in them to keep doing well, and they want to go to a top law school. And so that's why they'll end up going to Stanford or Yale or whatever it is. But that doesn't have to be the case. Like I did not do particularly well in high school. I went to Oberlin, which is a good school, but it's not an Ivy League school. But then I kind of turned it around. I got my grades together and kind of figured things out and got on this path. So it may seem like, everyone who goes to Harvard Law School all went to Ivy League schools. But I think that's more so a fact of the kinds of people who are inclined to apply to law school, not necessarily what admissions looks for. Do you have any resource recommendations for current college students interested in deferral programs at law schools? So basically, so I worked with a couple of deferral students. Basically, it's the same thing that I outlined before. But if anything, the last component of why is it that you want to go to law school, you need to be especially clear on. And also speak to what the benefit of you getting work experience before is, but also being able to say specifically what it is you're planning on doing. They're still looking at your LSAT, your GPA. There are a lot of people they take who go straight through, not for a deferral process, but just like normal law school. Like in my class at Stanford, I think 15% of my class went straight through. But fundamentally, all the aspects are the same. If we have a family member who attended a certain institution, not the law school, does it make sense to include that information in YX? I wouldn't do it in just like a name droppy way, like, hey, my buddy Joe went to Yale, and so I thought it's pretty sick, and so I want to go to Yale. But if there's something they taught you or something that you learned about the school that makes you interested in it, then that can be helpful. I will say it's kind of hard to pull that off writing wise without being kind of cringe about it. So that's where you want to have someone look at it to make sure that everything looks okay. But that's really the only situation where I would recommend doing that. How detrimental is a 3.5 GPA with 180 LSAT score for top schools? So, I mean, so all these schools will publish kind of the band of the lowest and the highest GPA that they took. A 3.5 180 is a really interesting example because there's maybe a reason for why your grades were a little lower. Let's say you did mechanical engineering at West Point, or something similar, then that's something you want to explain in your addendum. At the end of the day, a 180 LSAT score, like with this particular situation, I actually have someone I'm working with right now with this kind of similar breakdown. My approach is like apply everywhere you want to apply. It is going to be more of a roll of the dice as to how they interpret your information relative to if you had a higher GPA. But if your LSAT is that high, don't let numbers and rankings scare you. Go for the schools that you want to go for. And then obviously approach everything otherwise the way that I've explained in terms of attentiveness, your personal statement and recommendations. And how important is the ranking? I love this question. How important is the ranking if I'm most interested in public interest, working government, federal clerkships? So it really depends on what you mean by public service. So for clerking specifically, I would just say straight up, like there's a bias for the top 14 schools, but there's also a huge bias for the regional schools. And so it's not like I know you're in Georgia. If you look at kind of the circuit court down there, as well as all the different district courts in Georgia, it's filled with the UGA alum. Why is that? Because all of the judges went there, and so all their clerks, they like people from UGA. And so if that's something you're really interested in, like the regional school may be a really good approach to doing that. Another question is kind of general kind of government work. If you're doing something like DOJ, a lot of federal government work hinges on you clerking. And so that's where like you getting into the clerkship process becomes doubly important. If you're doing something local, like you want to be a local prosecutor or a public defender, in that case, generally your grades matter a little less, and it's more about what you do during law school. So all law schools have clinics, they have criminal defense, they have prosecution clinics, they have children's defense. You being able to show that you've had experiential experience and done that kind of work and spent your summers doing that is really what differentiates the public interest candidates. There will be some places like the ACLU, which do care a little bit more about your grades. But if it's kind of a lower ranking, less high profile nonprofit, it's really about the experiences you have during law school. As well as honestly, if you've worked before and you did something in, let's say, like immigration advocacy, and then you want to work for an immigration nonprofit, they really care about making sure that they get people who are committed to doing that work. And so to the extent you can show that you've done that in your previous life, that's super important. Did I use the same recommendations for Knight-Hennessy that I did for Stanford? For anyone that doesn't know, Knight-Hennessy is a scholarship at Stanford for all graduate schools, but I used it for the law school. Yes, I did. How did I become a Knight-Hennessy Scholar? Why don't we talk offline? You drop me a message. We can talk about that just because I want to focus more on the kind of broad law school questions here. Do schools care about whether you submit an LSAT or GRE? So for those of you who don't know, GRE scores started to get accepted a couple years ago. Based on the data I've seen, there is not a real difference, but it's hard to say because relatively fewer people are taking the GRE relative to the LSAT. So my honest response is so far it doesn't seem to make a difference. But as more people potentially take the GRE, we will see, because schools will adjust in seeing how much does the GRE correlate to success in law school, because generally, LSAT scores do correlate to your first year grades pretty well. What's my opinion on Harvard's JDP, Columbia's lead program? If you can shoot me a DM or an email after, we'll talk about that specifically, just because that's a bit narrow. Is getting into a T14 school or Stanford specifically off the table with a 3.0 undergrad GPA? Can we offset this? I'm never going to say that anything is ever off the table, just because I've seen some pretty wild things happen. I think that generally, if your numbers are not aligned with the school that you're looking at, that's where everything else you have to really perfect. And even in that case, it may not be quite enough. But again, like, you should shoot your shot, try. If you had, let's say you had a 180 LSAT and a 3.0 GPA, I'm not going to make any guarantees, but I would bet that you're going to get into at least one T14 law school, but you need to be able to show why is it that your GPA was lower. That's the whole thing about the addendum and adding context. Like, they need to have confidence that once you go to law school, you're going to be able to perform well academically. Obviously, your LSAT shows that, but that shows kind of how you understand analytical reasoning and reading comprehension in a particular moment of time. But law school is kind of like college in that, like, you're there for 3 years over an extended period of time. You're taking a lot of classes, and so your GPA is a reflection of how you've done in that kind of environment. And so if there was something that happened that you can explain, drop that in there and shoot your shot. Talk about super splitters. So that's basically the last question. What does the timeline look like if I'm planning to apply for the 2025-2026 cycle? First of all, good job thinking about it early. I would say the same thing, but you really have the benefit of having a bunch of time. So same component parts, make sure you have your LSAT in a good place, get your recommendations as early as possible. I would hold off, honestly, on writing the essays until the summer prior, just because you're going to, a lot happens in life every single day, and the person you are now is not going to be the person you are in a year, and you'll probably have better stories to tell. So for the more like objective things, lock those down, get them done, but then give yourself some time and space to write those essays later, just because you'll probably have a better story. And just kind of enjoy your life too. There's a lot more to life than law school admissions. How long do I recommend studying for the LSAT? This really depends. I studied for 2 months. Some people study for a year or years. I think generally the amount of time correlates with how focused you are and how much time you have in your free time. So when I say I studied for 2 months, it was like me kind of on and off for a month. Or about 5 weeks. And the last 3 weeks I had free time. I was not working. And so I literally took a practice test every single day. In the morning when I was going to take the test, in the afternoon I reviewed and I drilled. And so that was, I don't know, let's say like 6 hours per day. So, but everyone's super different. I have another guy right now who's a super smart guy, took the LSAT once, got as a practice test, got like a 175, and now he's just studying for like 10 hours before he actually takes it. So everyone's super different. I would start that process early just to establish where you are baseline, and then you'll know from there where is it that you're weak, that you want to work harder, and generally the more time you give yourself, the better. Does graduating undergrad a year early and going straight to law school make you stand out in a bad way because you don't have real experiences? No, I think if you have things in your life that you can speak to as to why you're going, and that compelling reason is just as compelling as it would be if you had worked, you're good to go. But you want to make sure you have that story straight. I will say, just kind of more personally, it helped me a lot to take time off because I got more clarity of purpose as to why I was going in the first place. There was a time where I thought about going straight through. But then I worked for a while and I just learned a lot about the world. I learned about what I enjoy doing, what I'm good at. And so for me, it was helpful. But I know some people, like, it just life circumstances, you have to go straight through. And so if that's the case, just make sure you have everything tight, you have a good story, you are internally resolved as to why you're going, and then let it rip. Can you write an addendum for a low LSAT score if an extreme personal circumstance influenced your performance? Yes. I won't ask personal circumstance what it was, but yeah, if it was something personal, you can, of course, talk about that. They have prompts with a personal statement. Generally, no. So it'll just say, like, tell us about yourself, or like, why are you applying to law school, so on and so forth. This is really kind of a free writing exercise. But you want to read all of these. Obviously, I haven't applied to every single law school nor seen all of them. All of the ones I have worked with, both in my sense and with different clients, I've probably seen 50. All of them are generally just a free write. You can write about whatever you want. What's the age range of when I was at Stanford? So the average is like 24, 25. I mean, we have people who are 21, we have people who are 38. So it goes all across the board. When you recommend taking the LSAT, I would take it as soon as you feel good that you're practice testing in a range where you feel good about the score. That can be tomorrow, that can be in 6 months, it can be in a year. I'm sorry, 2024. It cannot be in a year. Never mind. I would take it. I think it's too late to sign up for the June one right now. You can take the August one. If you really need to push it, you can take the October one. Beyond that, I would say if you can, I would wait until the next year just because you want to get in early for the reasons I talked about before. Okay, I think we're running out of time, unfortunately. So I'm sorry I couldn't get to everyone's questions. Now we had a lot of great questions, but what I will do is just put some of my info here for Leland. So Leland is a coaching platform that I've been on for a little bit now. I work with a number of different clients in a variety of contexts, either through the entire application process, just on their personal statement, or even just on an hourly basis, kind of answer one-off questions or kind of think about essays on an hourly basis. So you can find my profile if you just use your phone to scan this QR code right here. I also think in the chat, we're able to drop my link. So you can book a call with me. You can send me a message through that and I'll try to answer your question, or I will answer your question if I wasn't able to get to it. And then we will go from there. But I think with that, we are out of time, unfortunately. But thank you all so much for taking the time to show up. I really appreciate it. And I'm really proud of you for investing in yourself and doing everything you can to be successful in this process. I really want to help all you guys as much as I can. So please reach out to me if you have any questions. It doesn't even have to be a call. If you go to my profile, there's a chat function, so you can just drop me a sentence if that's what it is, and I'll get back to you within a day. Then we can go from there. But if you do want to work in more formal capacity, I do take on clients either for the whole process or just on essays or just talk one-on-one. So happy to do that. But thank you all again. I really appreciate it. And good luck with your process. You're all going to do great, and excited to see where you all end up. Hope you have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.